Cora sat by the window of her small apartment, gazing out at the hazy city skyline. The evening shadows were creeping across the streets below, turning everyday structures into silhouettes of quiet contemplation. A half-eaten sandwich lay forgotten on her coffee table. She pressed her fingertips against the window pane, letting the cool glass remind her that she was safe at home, at least for now. Worry was a feeling she knew all too well. It gnawed at her thoughts the moment she woke up and lingered until exhaustion forced her into bed at night. She worried about her job, her aging parents, her finances, the news, her health, and the anxious thoughts just piled on. For the longest time, she had resigned herself to living in this perpetual state of tension. But that same day, something began to stir inside her. A feeling that she was reaching a breaking point. She was tired of rushing to the doctor for minor complaints, of fidgeting whenever her phone buzzed, and of losing sleep to the endless litany of what-if scenarios that played in her mind. She craved relief from her racing anxieties. She needed to clear her mind, if only for a little while. With a determination born of desperation, she decided to allow herself an evening walk. While it used to calm her in the past, she had recently begun avoiding going out after dark. No more, she muttered to herself, slipping on her jacket. Outside, the air was cool and slightly damp. The streetlights had just flickered on, illuminating the sidewalk in a soft glow. The city was busy yet calm in its own nighttime routine. Shops starting to close, restaurants filling with patrons, buses making their last rounds. She felt each breath in her lungs, trying to focus on the refreshing chill and the rhythm of her steps. After aimlessly wandering a few blocks, she found herself on a street she rarely walked. A small, old-fashioned storefront caught her eye, its window showcasing an array of antiques, chipped teacups, brass doorknobs, porcelain figurines of dancing couples. Above the door, faded gold letters spelled out timeless treasures. Drawn by a sudden curiosity she couldn't explain, Cora opened the door. A tiny bell tinkled, surprising her with its cheerful note. Inside, dusty shelves and display cases teemed with objects from yesteryear. A tall man with wire-rimmed glasses and a kindly expression emerged from behind a carved oak counter. "Welcome," he said in a courteous tone. "Looking for anything special?" "Just browsing," Cora replied, feeling slightly self-conscious. Her gaze drifted over a variety of interesting pieces. There was a sense of nostalgia that pervaded the shop, so tangible it felt like stepping into another era. She paused at one shelf showcasing an assortment of hourglasses in modern, others with elaborate metal frames or intricately engraved glass. Among them lay a simple hourglass in a modest wooden stand, hardly remarkable at first glance. Yet something about its clear glass and soft pale sand arrested her attention. "That one is unique," the shop owner commented, noticing her interest. "You won't find anything else quite like it." Cora lifted the hourglass to inspect it more closely. The sand sparkled in a subtle spectrum of pastel colors when light struck it. Even though it looked new, there was a faint sense of enchantment around it, as though it contained stories yet untold. "How much is it?" she asked. The man's eyes gleamed with an odd warmth. "For you, special price. It's $20. She almost put it back. It felt strange buying something frivolous when finances weighed heavily on her mind. But something tugged at her, urging her not to pass this up. Tentatively, she set the hourglass on the counter and dug for the cash in her wallet. Back home, she placed the hourglass on her bedside table, telling herself it was just an odd impulse buy. Though part of her regretted wasting the money, another part was compelled to keep it near. There was something comforting about it, as if it promised to measure time in a gentle, patient way. And perhaps that was what she needed, a reminder that time flowed and worry never changed the sand's constant trickle. Before drifting off to sleep, she glanced at it one last time. Her anxiety was still there. She was anxious about how well she would sleep, how early she should wake up, all the usual. Yet, for a fleeting instant, a calming notion emerged. Maybe it was time to release some of her fears. Maybe she needed to stop letting them rule her life. In the morning, a series of frantic messages on her phone roused her from slumber. Work emergencies, again. She rushed through her morning routine, swallowing her coffee hurriedly before heading out. The hourglass sat on her bedside table, untouched. She didn't have a second to even look at it. At her office, everything felt like a test of her nerves. A demanding boss wanted new data processed. A coworker needed her help for a presentation. Emails overflowed with urgent tasks. By late afternoon, her hands were trembling, her stomach was in knots, and her thoughts fluttered from one worry to the next. Stepping outside for a short break, she took her phone out to call her mother and check on her. No answer, which added a new dimension of fear to her day. When she arrived home that evening, her shoulders slumped with fatigue, but the moment she pulled the door shut, an odd sensation caught her attention. The hourglass on her bedside table. It looked different. The wooden stand had shifted slightly, and the glass seemed somehow smaller. She rubbed her eyes, thinking her exhaustion was playing tricks on her. Placing her keys and bag aside, she carefully lifted the hourglass, comparing it to her memory of the previous day. It did feel as though it had shrunk. The sand hardly reached a third of the glass's capacity, yet she distinctly recalled it being almost half full when she first bought it. A flicker of unease swept over her. Was something wrong with the glass? Had it leaked somehow? That made no sense. There was no sign of sand anywhere on the table. She set it down, perplexed. Rather than dwell, she decided to rest. She had to prepare for another busy day, and she didn't have the energy to investigate further. Maybe she was simply mistaken. For the rest of the week, her anxiety soared. The workload intensified, her boss's demands grew harsher, and her mother's ongoing migraines worried her. They seemed to worsen, and Cora felt powerless. One evening, when she returned, she walked into her bedroom and froze. The hourglass was considerably smaller than she first remembered. Now it was barely taller than her comb. Her heart hammered in confusion. She grabbed it, as if expecting to see some mechanical trick, but she found no cracks or illusions. The hourglass had genuinely shrunk. Her mind leapt with possibilities, each more fantastic than the last. Had she been a victim of some bizarre hoax? Was the shop owner a magician of some sort? She recalled something he had said. You won't find anything else quite like it. Was it an antique with bizarre properties? She began to hyperventilate, the all too familiar tide of panic rising in her chest. But fear quickly transformed to curiosity, and a small spark of daring flickered. I need to figure out what's happening, she murmured. That same night, she left the hourglass on her dining table, switching on a lamp to keep a close eye. She pulled a chair next to it, determined to observe what it did. But as she stared, the minute grains of sand slowly trickled from the top bulb to the bottom. The glass itself remained inert. She grew sleepy, waiting for something to happen. Eventually, her eyelids drooped and she sighed in exasperation. Maybe I'm imagining it, she said to herself, turning off the lamp and heading to her bedroom. The following evening, she found herself feeling anxious about a big meeting the next day. Her latest project was at a critical phase, with high stakes for her job security. Gently, she reached for the hourglass, wanting somehow to draw comfort from its steady presence. To her disbelief, the moment her heart rate kicked up and her throat tightened from worry, she noticed the hourglass shudder faintly in her hands. The sand within seemed to glow an iridescent hue, and instantly the hourglass's top portion appeared to lose volume, like it had been squeezed. In less than a heartbeat, the entire hourglass was smaller by a fraction. Cora let out a sharp cry, nearly dropping it. Then, as her alarm subsided, the shimmering vanished, and the hourglass remained in its new, slightly reduced size. She cradled it, baffled. It had reacted directly to her fear. The more anxious she felt, the more it shrank. That was the moment it all clicked. This was no ordinary tchotchke. It was a manifestation of how she handled fear. Every time she let her anxiety run wild, the hourglass shrank, as if it was measuring her courage in direct opposition to her terror. She tested it again, letting her mind wander to a worry about her mother's migraines. Sure enough, the hourglass pulsated weakly and became just a touch smaller. Cora gasped, setting it down carefully. Was it possible that if she let herself be overwhelmed by enough fear, the hourglass would vanish entirely? The sudden image of it crumbling to smoldering dust in her hands rattled her. She had no idea what would happen if it disappeared, or if it would cause some misfortune to her, or signify the complete devouring of her own spirit by fear. Her mind brimmed with questions, but one thing was clear. She had to learn control. She had to muster courage. In the days that followed, Cora tried training herself not to succumb to her usual swirling dread. She read about mindfulness exercises, she practiced deep breathing. She forced herself to confront smaller worries, testing whether staying calm would keep the hourglass from shrinking further. For instance, she disliked talking to her boss about anything that might risk conflict. A delayed partnership proposal arose, and she needed more time to complete some analytics. Typically, she would dread telling him, fearing he'd yell, question her competence, or put her job at risk. This time, though her insides quaked, she forced herself to approach him calmly. She pinched her fingertips together under the table to ground herself during the conversation and spoke as evenly as she could, explaining her thorough process to ensure accuracy. To her surprise, her boss merely nodded, gave her a short extension, and told her not to worry about it too much. The fear that had seemed certain to be validated never was. During that conversation, she felt a slight tingling around the hourglass lying in her purse. When she arrived home, she saw the glass had not shrunk. If anything, it seemed to have regained a fraction of its original size. It was slight, but she was almost sure of it. A spark of hope lit in her chest. Perhaps she could reverse the shrinking with acts of bravery. Curbing her worries was a slow, stumbling process. She had spent a lifetime giving in to them, so doing the opposite took immense effort. Yet each time she steadied her breath and faced a problem directly, the hourglass rewarded her. Whenever she was uncertain but consciously chose to believe in herself instead of spiraling, she noticed the hourglass's form grow just a tiny bit larger, as though she was replenishing its no, her sense of courage. One day, she visited her mother, who had been persistently battling intense migraines. That morning, doctors delivered a new diagnosis, suggesting a treatment plan that might help reduce the pain. Though her mother was optimistic, Cora's anxiety soared upon hearing the complicated details. She felt the urge to panic, to drown in fear yet again, but she let her mother's optimism guide her. "We'll get through it together," she forced herself to say, capturing her mother's hand, and the hourglass vibrated faintly in her purse, shimmering with pastel radiance. That evening, it appeared a shade taller, as though each encouragement, each refusal to drown in panic, was restoring the sand's capacity. Nevertheless, Cora had not achieved full mastery of her emotions. There were days when her nerves frayed beyond her control. A minor fender bender on a stressful Monday nearly undid her progress. She stood, shaking, on the side of the road, tearful at the thought of insurance claims and possible rate hikes. Her heart galloped, fear twisting her insides. The hourglass, nestled in her bag, responded with immediate contraction, shrugging off another fraction of its height. Only when she realized what was happening did she take a series of calming breaths and reassure herself that everything was manageable. Every success and every setback made her more aware. Whether at work, at home, or in a difficult conversation, she began measuring her emotional response. Instead of diving headlong into worst-case scenarios, she consciously halted the cycle of fear each time. As the worry eased, so did the pressure she placed on the hourglass. She wasn't always perfect. Fear was an old friend with a strong hold, but she was improving. Her biggest test arrived on a Sunday morning when her mother was rushed to the hospital with a severe episode of head pain and disorientation. Cora's mind defaulted to panic as she drove to the hospital, imagining the worst. The hourglass pulsed at her side. She felt its contractions as the dunes of fear churned in her chest. Standing at the entrance of the emergency ward, she had to grit her feet in place, her breath shuddering. A meltdown seemed inevitable. But something inside her caught hold. She remembered the slow but steady restoration of the hourglass each time she had held herself together. She vividly recalled the importance of embracing a calmer perspective. Fear would do nothing to help her mother. She needed to be strong for her. So she willed herself to push aside the swirling thoughts of doom, inhaled deeply, and channeled a sense of hope. She stepped through the double doors, resolved to stay calm, to think clearly, and to get answers. With each heartbeat that kept her anxiety in check, she felt a gentle conviction. She did not have to be consumed by fear anymore. She could respond from a place of courage. When she finally saw her mother, face drawn in pain, yet still smiling weakly at her daughter, Cora's eyes brimmed with tears, but she kept them from dissolving into sobs. She asked the nurses about the ongoing treatment, took notes, and kept reassuring her mother that they would overcome this. The hourglass, hidden in her purse, remained steady. Her mother spent 2 nights at the hospital undergoing new tests. Cora practically lived there alongside her. For the first time in her life, instead of letting anxiety paralyze her, she channeled her energy into practical steps, talking to specialists, arranging her mother's belongings, discussing medication options. With each action, she noticed how she was learning to embrace the present moment rather than wallowing in catastrophic misgivings about the future. When her mother stabilized enough to go home, Cora felt a deep well of relief. Any fear she had felt remained overshadowed by hope and love. That night, setting her purse down, she pulled out the hourglass. It was almost at its original size, if not slightly bigger. Holding it close, Cora felt a surge of gratitude. But the growth wasn't endless. She realized that the hourglass hadn't expanded beyond its initial dimensions. It seemed to be approaching the exact proportion it had been on day one. One peaceful Saturday morning, while sipping tea, she contemplated whether it could become larger than it had started. Did that possibility even exist? She closed her eyes, promising herself to keep facing her fears, no matter the outcome. Maybe the point wasn't to turn the hourglass into a giant, but to maintain its balance and preserve its rightful form. And so life continued in a new normal. Work challenges still arose, but she faced them with more poise. At home, she no longer spent evenings obsessing about whether she had locked the door or if the city's traffic would be catastrophic tomorrow. She found ways to steady her breathing and focus on the present. When she felt her heart rate rise, she'd pause, visualize positivity, and remind herself that panic was simply an urge, not a command. Growing calmer, she even took small steps toward personal goals she had long since shelved, like painting, something she had always wanted to try. The hourglass came to symbolize her personal growth. Yet, ironically, as her dependence on fear lessened, so did her need to check the hourglass constantly. She still felt protective of it, and she kept it close by at night. She also noticed something intriguing. It glowed gently whenever she performed acts of genuine courage that she hadn't been capable of before. It was as if it recognized each moment she dared to break old cycles. Around that time, she got a call from the antique shop owner. Apparently, she had left her phone number at purchase in case the store needed to reach her about the hourglass's custom stand. "I just wanted to let you know I found the little plaque that goes with your hourglass," he said. It was in a box in the back. A few days later, Cora visited the quaint shop for the first time since she'd bought the hourglass. She found the owner polishing an antique mirror. He smiled brightly. "Glad you came. I set that item aside for you." He retrieved a small brass plaque, barely the size of a business card. Engraved on it were words so delicately scripted they looked almost handwritten. "In every moment, fear draws breath where courage will not rise. When courage stirs, fear loses its grasp." Cora's hand trembled as she held the plaque. It captured, in perfect brevity, the very lesson she had been learning. With heartfelt thanks, she turned to go, but paused to ask, "What do you really know about this hourglass?" A gentle twinkle appeared in his eyes. "Legends say it's older than it looks. Some used to believe it measured the bravery of its owner. My grandmother used to say that each grain of sand stood for a breath you take without giving in to fear." She nodded thoughtfully, thinking back to how the sands had glittered whenever her courage flourished. She realized she had no real desire to unravel the hourglass's origins further. The meaning it carried was enough. It had come into her life at just the right time. Months passed, and so did many challenges. Her mother's health was a roller coaster, but the new treatment regimen showed promise, and Cora remained her patient confidant. Work was still hectic, but she navigated it with a grace that was new even to her. The tension that once lived in her shoulders now appeared only in fleeting moments. Each minor victory felt more profound, like crossing small bridges to reach a future less bound by worry. One clear morning, while tidying up her desk, she noticed the hourglass was glittering under the sunlight filtering through the window. It stood at its normal height, quietly present. Carefully, she picked it up and just held it in her palms, the glow of the sand dancing against the glass. Pressing her lips together, she wondered whether she might outgrow the hourglass some. Could there come a time when she no longer needed such a tangible conduit of courage? She shut her eyes, recalling the times that she'd felt the sands constrict and the times they'd expanded. She remembered how fear used to dictate her decisions, limiting her life. Now she felt freer, more open to experiences, and less concerned about hypothetical catastrophes. She understood fear would always exist in some form. She was human after all, but she also knew she could choose to face it with compassion. Perhaps that acceptance was the real measure of bravery. In that moment, she didn't feel swirling anxiety. She felt the hush of the morning, the warmth of the sun, and the soft heartbeat in her chest. It seemed as though the hourglass was humming quietly, even though it made no sound. The curve of the wooden stand fit perfectly in her hands. She smiled, that small, gentle smile of someone who has come to an understanding. She placed the plaque beside the hourglass on the shelf, reading the inscription once more. Running her finger along the engraved words, she realized she had embodied them, whether she carried the hourglass physically or not. Later that evening, she found herself outside, taking another one of those gentle nighttime walks. As she strolled past the flickering streetlights, she saw her neighbors chatting, couples walking their dogs, and a serene hush settling on the city. She felt surprisingly at peace. It was that sense of trust in the moment, even with uncertainty swirling around, that marked how far she had come. She knew she would have bad days sometimes. She knew life would present unforeseen problems. But after all she had learned, she believed in her own resilience enough to handle difficulties without letting them consume her. That was the core lesson. She did not have to let fear shrink her life. She found a bench in a small green park near her building and sat. The evening's breeze tousled her hair, and she watched as birds glided across the lamppost glow. In her purse, she carried the hourglass, but she didn't feel the need to check it. She knew it was fine, right where it needed to be. She closed her eyes, took a slow breath, and felt gratitude for being able to savor such a tranquil moment without the anxious knots that once clenched her chest. If anything, she felt a bright anticipation for whatever came next, trusting her ability to meet each challenge with as much resolve and hope as she could muster. Cora never discovered the exact magic that created the hourglass, nor the full extent of its power. She didn't have to. Its gift had been teaching her that she could shape her own response to fear. Her life no longer felt like a hurried sprint toward a stressful unknown, but rather a journey on which she could pause to collect calm. Each breath was a single grain of sand, passing not from a place of dread to a place of despair, but from doubt toward a steadily growing reservoir of courage. Sometimes, when she felt a tremor of worry, she would visualize those pastel-colored grains swirling gently. She'd whisper silently to herself, "Fear shrinks, courage expands." And then she would catch her breath and let the moment unfold as it should, trusting herself to see it through. In the end, she learned to embrace not just the hourglass, but the moment itself, listening to the heartbeat in each grain of sand and understanding that with courage, time opened up, revealing a life of possibility. And that, she thought, was worth every ounce of bravery it had taken to get there.